to the third unit, which is entitled Characteristics of the Communication Process. This is the first lesson, Understanding the Communication Process. Now, the objectives that have been set for this lesson are define communication and identify the 6 factors of communication. It is high time to focus on communication, as our success depends on the way we manage to convey our intentions to our audience. Now, the audience can be your closest friends in a cafe, or the members of your team working on a project, or the possible investors listening to your pitch. I'd like you to write down the continuation of the following statements. You have to imagine the situation and put down what you would do in that situation to successfully realize your communicative intentions. 1. When I communicate with my friend, I. 2. When I communicate with my team, I. 3. When I communicate with my boss, I. And 4. When I communicate to a larger audience, I. I'd also like you to think the way the verbs feel, behave, and listen are related to the communication process. If you were to list them according to the order of importance, what would come first, second, and third? Communication is quite often perceived as a piece of cake, requiring little effort from our part in conveying our communicative intentions. Yet this is a tricky approach that can lead to miscommunication and a lot of resentment felt by the parties involved in the process of communication. That is, by the addressee, the speaker or the writer of what is communicated, and by the addressee, that is the listener or reader of that act of communication. There is a popular quote on the internet attributed to George Bernard Shaw, which says, "The single biggest problem in communication is the illusion that it has taken place." Now, how can this be so? How difficult can it be to realize one's intention successfully? Why achieving success in communication is believed to be only an illusion? People communicate on a regular basis. One can be said to do it continuously when they are awake, including self-talk as another form of communication. The point is that absolutely every act of communication is governed by a communicative intention. We communicate because we want our addressees to do something, to react in a specific way. Thus, we can assume that any act uttered by an addresser with an intention to arouse a specific response from the addressee is an act of communication. However, this intention can be successfully realized if the context is taken into consideration. This is why when we talk to our friends, we communicate in a certain way, whereas when we communicate with our boss, we use other communicative strategies. Why is context so important? Because it activates the necessary schemata in both the addresser and the addressee. They will use more or less similar mental representations in their heads in the process of encoding and decoding their message. The contextualized language ceases to be abstract as it carries the concrete meaning intentionally encoded by the addresser and inferred by the addressee. Thus, the primary aim of communication consists in the realization of the addresser's communicative intention, who seeks to influence the receiver's mentality and behavior. It is important to retain that the context will influence the choice of language in all our social interactions and the effects of our choice on others. We might assume that we can say anything we like, yet we are restrained in most cases unconsciously by a number of socio-cultural conventions. Let's consider the well-known model of communication defined by Roman Jakobson. He believed that 6 elements are necessary for communication to occur. They are context, addresser, addressee, contact, common code, and message. An addressee encodes the communicative intention in the message that is to be decoded by an addressee. Both are expected to take into consideration the context in which the message is produced and use a fully or at least partially common code in the process. Finally, the message is conveyed via a physical channel that creates a certain psychological connection between the addressee and the addressee, enabling both of them to stay in communication. Now let's try to understand this by considering our communication. Do you think that this very lesson is an act of communication? I'm pretty sure you said yes. Now let's prove that it is so. I am the addressee of this act of communication and you are my addressees. What is the message? It is encoded in the form of a virtual lecture on communication. The context can be viewed as a virtual classroom, which implies a mentor and at least one mentee. When it comes to the code, I speak in English and namely the language of academic discourse. Now you might ask yourselves, in what way is the context important? Imagine me delivering a similar message at your birthday party. Will it be appropriate? Absolutely not. Another question you might have is, but you have told us that the addressee also seeks to influence the addressee's behavior. How do you influence ours? My intention is to make you get a better understanding of the complexity of the communication process so that you can gain more confidence while communicating your messages and also be able to decode the other's messages appropriately. If I succeeded in getting your attention, I have already changed your behavior. Yet the purpose is to make you internalize this information and use it in your future interactions. We can analyze any act of communication in this way. Now let's see what some lesson takeaways are. Communication is an extremely complex process. It is context bound. This means you will communicate in a certain way, taking into consideration the context in which you are. Every act of communication is governed by a communicative intention seeking to influence the addressee. The 6 factors of communication are the addressee, the addressee, the message, the context, the code, and the contact.